What we're going to do in this video is show you how we made this 24-volt lithium-ion battery from recycled batteries and turned it into something that the kids can use for their ride-on toys. So join us today as we transform our kingdom. Welcome everybody. In this video, we're going to talk about batteries and adding them to our ride-on toys. Before my first son was even born, we had that Power Wheels ride-on toy. It has always been there waiting for him to get old enough to use it. So finally at his, I think it was his second or third birthday, we broke it out and taught him how to use it. This has been one of those toys that has kind of evolved with him as he's gotten older. He's 7 years old now, almost 8. And it started off with the slow speed, nice, easy to drive, scared him, big eyes the first couple times he used it. But as he's gotten older, we've been able to make it a little faster and faster. There's a set screw in it where you can keep it in the slow speed, kind of like a governor, and then as he gets older, you just back that screw out and he gets full use of the throttle. Well, after a number of years, that wasn't fast enough. These ride-on toys are typically up to 12 volts for the small single-person ones. In order to make it faster, we made a 24-volt battery for it. That's what you see here. This is 3 batteries in parallel, 2 sets of those to get us to 24 volts. These are sealed lead-acid batteries. They can be found in UPSs. So don't just throw those away. When you're going through, if you have an opportunity, you find a couple of them, take out the batteries, make sure they're useful, but they are rechargeable batteries and they have a deep cycle on them. And remember, any batteries should not go in the trash. Always recycle your batteries. So once we made this battery and used it for a number of years, it worked great. But more and more of their toys, because we have 4 of these ride-on toys, more and more of these toys, the batteries go bad. So batteries won't last but maybe 3 years and get their full charge. The 4-wheelers that we have out back or on the back porch, they go much quicker, simply because they're outside in the elements where it's cold, it's hot, it's cold, hot, it's hot. That ruins the batteries. What we're going to do in this video is show you how we made this. It is a 24-volt lithium-ion battery. It is 4 cells or 4 parallel sets of lithium-ion batteries in 6 rows, and we'll go through how we made this, adapted it to fit the car, and show you all the fun stuff along with making it. We have a number of used batteries. So lithium-ion batteries are found in a lot of things. This is a battery from a Dyson vacuum, cordless drill batteries, anything and everything that you can think of in one form or another, you'll find a lithium-ion battery in it. We're looking for a specific type. These are 18650 style batteries. They look like a larger AA battery, and in fact you can get AA batteries in lithium-ion form that have the same voltage as the 18650. So the 18650s, where a traditional battery is 1.5 volts for a AA, these range anywhere from 2 to 3 volts depending on how charged they are. So what we're going to do today is show you the process we go through when we take one of these apart and what to look for. So a couple things to consider. Of all of these batteries, these 2 are the only ones that I would consider reusing or looking into. This is a old DeWalt 18 volt battery, and inside here are the nickel metal style batteries, while this is you can find them on Amazon. They're cheap knockoffs of the 18650, and that's where this actually came from. But when you look inside of here, this is a cheaper battery pack. There is no battery management system inside of here. So all they've done in order to sell you a cheaper version of, I think this is a Makita style battery, they've just hooked up the battery directly to the contacts on the battery pack. So when we take this apart, what you're going to see is no battery management system, and they've soldered the leads directly to the battery themselves. When you go to charge this up, it will work, but there's nothing controlling the voltage, how much the battery will actually discharge for operation. And of all the battery packs that we've taken apart, this is the only one that has massive amounts of corrosion. And you can see where the battery itself is leaking out. We are going to avoid using these style of batteries. If it's a cheap no name with no battery management system in it, we're not going to touch it. The same thing goes for most of the DeWalt's, where a Milwaukee or Dyson or a lot of the other batteries will come with a battery management board inside of them. The DeWalt's and some of the cheap ones won't. And that really doesn't matter because the tools for DeWalt and the actual chargers have the battery management system built into them. I prefer the Milwaukee brand or some of the others where they don't. And this becomes important when you actually want to use these for things other than the manufacturer intended. So I can put an adapter on here and I can never drain a Milwaukee battery to the point it's dead. It won't let me. The battery management system will turn off. You'll notice this when you use a Milwaukee. You'll get full voltage right up until the last screw and then it shuts off. Where if you use a DeWalt drill, you'll run it down, you feel it just starting to get weak and weak and weak, and you'll keep using it because it still works, but it's really not doing what it should be doing. That's a good indication to stop using it and go charge it. That actually prolongs the life of the battery. So good things to know. So what we're going to do is Henry's going to help me take apart this battery, and we'll show you what's inside of it and what it looks like with the battery management system on it, and I'll show you why this is still a good use or a good candidate for reuse. Here you go. Perfect. So when we pop this apart, you'll have the battery management system all tied together, and the connectors. So we don't need this. Now, when we take a look at this, you can actually see that all of these batteries are probably in great shape. So 3.4 volts, 3.5 volts, there's 6.9 there, 3.5 there, 3.5 there, 3.45 there, 3.44 there. So this battery from Dyson, battery's in great shape. There's probably a lot of cycles left in these. This board, something's wrong on it. It won't charge or discharge. Now, most everybody doesn't have an endless supply of these. What you can do, and what we've been doing, is whenever we go drop off some batteries at Lowe's or Home Depot, any big box store that has the recycling out front, you can usually talk to them and ask them if the batteries that are in there are something that you can take home and use. Let them know you're using it for a recycling project. This is not going to go straight in the landfill. We're trying to reuse them, and you know, it's something that you know, saves a little bit of effort. We don't have to go out and buy brand new batteries, and these are in great shape. So this is something that's going to be useful. We'll go ahead and tear this board off of it, replace one of our own that we know has worked, or combine this into a larger battery pack, like we did with the one for the boys' Power Rails, or for their ride-on toys. So just stay tuned and you'll see what we do with this here in a little bit. We set about to process all the batteries. This involved disassembling all of the shells, taking all the battery components apart, and then starting to organize them into useful pieces. The shells can sometimes be a pain to take apart. The cordless drills are very easy, but things like laptop batteries can sometimes take a little bit of work. Henry really enjoys taking things apart, so while I'm standing over him, make sure he doesn't short anything, we disassemble all the existing control boards and take a few minutes to separate them all out based on size. Size on the 18650 batteries is more about their milliamp capacity, or the amount of energy that they can store. When taking apart the battery groups, I like to leave the zinc strips on the battery. I don't want to break apart the spot weld that holds them on there, and this actually gives me something to solder to when we go to reassemble them. Be very careful though, they do leave sharp edges, so when you're taking them apart, you do not want to cut yourself. Also make sure that you do not nick the insulation on the battery. This is something that we did not let Henry do. This is definitely a job for a steadier hand. We made sure to wear safety glasses with here, and we really should have been wearing gloves at this time too. But if you take your time and go slow, these come apart relatively easily. There's not much to it. After you get them all cut apart, just take a few minutes, clean off the last little bit of glue that remained from when they were assembled in the battery cage, and get them ready for the next step. For this battery pack, we needed 24 batteries. Sometimes finding 24 batteries that are all the same milliamp capacity can be hard, especially if you want them to all have the same usable life. So you may have to find things that are very close. And that's what we did here. These are all from laptops, all similar milliamps, just a little bit different age. Once all the batteries are disassembled and ready for use, it's important to go ahead and verify voltage on each. They have to be charged to a minimum voltage before you can assemble them in the battery pack, or the battery management system will not charge them. So here you can see I'm using a couple of magnets held in the alligator clips to just hold them to the ends of the batteries. This is a quick way to make that connection. I set my power supply, which is current limiting. That simply means that it only allows a certain amount of amperage to be put in the battery. There is an actual curve that you have to follow when recharging these to make sure that they do not overheat, which can be dangerous. That curve is found anywhere online. Quick searching will do it, and I'll post a link below. What this recharge process entails is charging them very slowly. Here we're charging them between 0.1 and 0.2 amps while they're below 1 volt. And this is something we'll have to do to a good number of the batteries. This does indicate that these batteries will have a shorter life. They are not going to be as productive as a brand new 18650 straight out of the box with ample charge, but that's fine. We're using scrap batteries that we know are good, or at least good enough to make this battery pack. This process will continue with all 24 batteries. Couple comments here though. Never leave it unattended. You're dealing with batteries that are used. This is one of the best ways to look at the state of the battery. The way it takes on voltage should be a nice linear increase. It should not drop out. It should not reach a dead spot. So as it comes up in voltage and the amperage that it takes, you'll slowly increase that continuously until you get to that max voltage of 4.2 volts per battery. Henry's favorite part of this whole process was assembling the battery holders. These are modular. You can set them up however you want. The BMS board that we're using lends itself to a very linear layout. So the pins on it are designed to go back and forth across the board, and you'll see that when we go solder them together. These go together a lot like Legos, and Henry used a dead blow mallet just to tap them together, do the final assembly. Once that was done, he went through and assembled the batteries, of course with supervision, and made sure that they were aligned in the right direction. Positive terminals going one way and then alternating back and forth. I chose to mix and match the batteries into individual cells so that the two different ages of the battery were mixed together to provide a better current draw. Once the batteries were assembled into the holders, it's time to start connecting the individual cells together. This is a bit of a controversial topic. There are a lot of people that say you should never solder these batteries. Use a spot welder, which will allow you to do a short, high amount of heat in a very local region. This is the best way to do it, is to always use a spot welder, but I don't have one. That's why I wanted to leave the existing pieces that were already spot welded on there, and I'm soldering to them. This produces less heat into the battery themselves, but it is not ideal. You can get spot welders for this type of work. I don't do enough of it to make it justifiable. Just be careful. Make sure you don't get any of the batteries super hot. You will shorten their life. If you go too far, you could cause them to rupture, which is, again, very dangerous. So be careful. Again, don't do this if you're not capable or if you don't have a comfort level with it. You may also notice the silver Sharpie on the battery holders. I added this to help remind me where to solder the different terminals together. I wanted to avoid shorting some of these batteries together and blowing them up. Once that was done, used a little bit of hot glue to affix the BMS board to the assembled battery. This just holds it in place. Here in a little bit, once the wires are on and we start wrapping everything up, it's not going to go anywhere. So this isn't a very strong joint, but it helps when we're getting ready to do the initial assembly. If you'll notice on the boards too, the battery positive, battery negative, all the pins line up. So be very cognizant of how you're putting this on there and align those terminals to the closest joints on the batteries, so it makes it easy when you come back. Here all I'm doing is doing my initial tinning of the pads. This is going to give me something for my wires to attach to. So quickly fill them up with a little bit of solder, and then when you come back here in a second, it'll make it a lot easier. The wires that I'm soldering on here are the sense and balance wires. The board measures the joints between each of the battery cells and understands at what voltage they are, so it's evenly charging them, and that's the purpose of these wires. They have a lower capacity or a lower ampacity than the ones going to the positive and negative terminals and what feed out of it. All they're doing is helping to regulate the voltage of the charge so they can get by with a smaller wire gauge. I left them long so I could initially do the soldering here, and then I'll cut them to fit here in a second when we solder them to the individual pads. Just a quick reminder here, you are working with a battery that's been charged. So as you come in close with any kind of metal tool, make sure not to come in contact with the battery terminals themselves. You could cause a short. A quick short is not going to hurt anything. It'll scare you, but if something's left to rest on here, you will short dead across lithium ion batteries, and again, scary, dangerous. Once they're cut, stripped, go ahead and tin them, and this is going to make it very easy for us to attach them to the pads, and you'll have a nice clean installation. Sorry for my knuckles being in the way. This is honestly one of those jobs where you want a third hand to do them. I'm using a pick to hold the wires up against the terminals as I'm soldering them on. This is an easy way to do it. Just make sure you get the heat where it needs to go, and you'll feel it suck in and the solder flow between the two joints. You could, of course, use a third hand or some other kind of tool to help hold the wires in place. I find this to be pretty quick, and I don't have to set up another set of tools to do this. And it's relatively easy once you get the hang of it. One more quick thing to point out, you may have noticed that I've moved to my workbench with a rubber top. Never do this type of work with a metal top bench. Again, another opportunity for you to short a battery. Once the sense wires were installed, it was time to come back and put the main battery wires in. You notice these are a lot thicker gauge. Always make sure you're sizing the gauge of your wire to the application you're doing. This is going to be for a 30 to 40 amp Power Wheels toy. That's why I'm sitting here with 10 gauge wire. It's a bit overkill, but it will work for what we're doing, and I feel comfortable with having that much energy flow through this. You can look up the ampacity or the capacity of wires online. There's a lot of great charts for that, and I can put a link below. These wires are thicker and they tend to be a little more stiff. That's why I've switched to a pair of pliers to help hold them in place while I'm installing them on the battery. These battery management systems are all charged and discharged through the same terminals. Some other ones that you get will actually have a different circuit that it does its charging through. The beauty of these is they act just like the Power Wheels, so you have to unplug them and plug them in. After we connected those, the main leads to the wire, came back with some tape and started basically using the battery as its own strain relief. You can see here I'm wrapping up all of the terminals with a vinyl tape. This is a thick vinyl tape that helps to protect the battery terminals, keeps all of those solder joints together, and will protect it. Of course, there's going to be multiple layers of protection on this battery, and ideally you would put a large layer of heat shrink over the top of it, but I didn't have any. I can always come back and add some later, but for this, I'm just going around and adding some good wraps of tape to it. I'm intentionally wrapping the wires around the battery cells to act as strain relief. Typical hardware will have some way to tie a knot or prevent the battery wires from pulling off the board. You don't want any strain going on that board, so I'm using the battery itself and embedding those wires underneath the vinyl tape to help with that. The next protective layer we're going to put on this is just simple craft foam. This is thin foam that you can get at Hobby Lobby or any other craft store. I like to lay it out, use a straight edge, and we can quickly mark and figure out what cuts we need to make to do a wrap around the entire battery. This is great because it stops all the sharp edges from the solder joints from puncturing through the vinyl. It also adds a little bit of impact resistance to the battery. And once that's installed, we do an entire second wrap of vinyl tape around the outside of this. This is not electrical tape. This is a vinyl tape that you get. I think it's a 3M brand or something similar to that. And it's a little bit more robust. It doesn't leave that nasty sticky residue that you'll get with electrical tape. And it's a little bit thicker than electrical tape too. And once that's done, you essentially have a finished battery. To quickly test it out, I'm going to put this PWM, pulse width modulated speed controller, onto the battery and use it to test out the function of it on the power wheels. You want to do this because you are going to ruin the motors with extended use if you just hook them right up to a 24-volt battery. The Power Wheels motor is usually 6 or 12 volts, and they cannot handle the extra amperage. Believe me, we'll show you in a future video. But this is a way to actually regulate that down to, say, 18 volts at a safe level. Again, for this quick test, we're just going to hook it up here. In the future, this is all going to be installed with a charging cable, and we'll show you that here in a second. But essentially, this is just a quick way for us to test it out, make sure everything works before we do the next steps. Now that we're done making the battery pack, we're going to talk about connectors and charging them. Charging the battery pack is very simple if we have our BMS board inside of them. The BMS board is what allows us to charge the battery up safely. It allows it to shut off when it's discharging so you do not drop the voltage too low in the battery pack. And it has different circuits across each battery to evenly charge the battery so you get the longest life out of them possible. Most of the time, all you have to do is find a power supply with an adjustable voltage and dial that into what you want the max charge voltage to be. That's easy to find. Look up the specs on the BMS board and it will tell you how high it will charge to. So what I have here are two different types of power supplies that will work. They are 1 amp and 3 amp respectively. This one is one I chose not to use for this. So sure, it'll be another project later on. But what you're looking for is an adjustable voltage on the power supply. This allows you to dial that in correctly. These power supplies will have an overamp shutoff, so you don't worry about drawing too much current out of them. Make sure it's safe for your kids though, or make sure it's safe for your family. That's one of the reasons I do not want to use this power supply, because the terminals are exposed. Think of this as a kid taking a paper clip or a screwdriver and sticking it in an electrical socket. That's what they're going to get if this is plugged in. So we don't want to use this. Instead, what I've done is I've taken this power supply, made sure it had a correct plug on it. All of the terminals are covered, and I put 3 charging circuits on it. So this one power supply can do 3 of their ride-on toys now. And the goal here is to have even a battery like this, as well as these, I'll be able to charge at the same spot. So when they're done with their toys, they can just run and plug them in. Fair warning here, I don't usually like to leave these plugged in for too long. It's not that I don't trust everything, but it's a good practice never to keep it at its highest voltage. You want to have a stored voltage. If they're not going to use it for a couple weeks, you're going to want that voltage to be a little bit lower than its max. So after the boys played with the ride-on toy for a while and made sure everything was working, both the battery and the speed controller, we went through and started putting the right connectors on. These are a little bit higher voltage or higher amperage connectors. They are great for this type of work, and what we're going to do is make it common to where the end of the battery and the chargers all work across all three of the Power Wheels toys. And again, Power Wheels is a brand, they're ride-on toys. But you can see Henry's Corvette in the back is missing the wheels and everything else. It's going through an upgrade right now as well, and we'll be working on it in the next video. But the intent here is that you'll be able to take any one of these batteries and swap them between any of the vehicles. They'll all have common speed controllers, and they'll all work together great. So now that we've got the battery built, we've got a way to charge it, let's show you what it looks like actually in the vehicles. We're going to start off with Henry's four-wheeler. This is one that's been in desperate need of a battery for a while. The four-wheelers consume a lot more amperage than, say, the Corvette does, just for the fact that they are in tall grass. When you're going up and down hills in tall grass, you get a lot of traction. The wheels don't slip. This makes it to where all of that torque, all of that energy gets put to the battery, so you gotta be careful about them. We're gonna go ahead and put a speed controller in the four-wheeler. This will help us to where we're not gonna wear out the motors too quick. The motors are replaceable, and in fact, look for a video coming up real quick about that. In fact, you've probably seen in the background of this video the wheels in the back end apart on the Corvette. So yes, after a while, the next weakest link does happen, and we do have to replace motors. But it's not a hard job, it's actually pretty easy, and once you do it once, it becomes super quick to do it again if it ever happens. So while the four-wheeler is fun, and it's now faster than it was before, we'll show you what it looks like in the Corvette as well. Anything on the street where you can lose traction and have fun, the boys tend to enjoy it quite a bit more. So we'll play out in the front on the sidewalk, make a little raceway, quite a bit more than we will in the backyard, but it's nice to have both things. There's a lot of other things that are involved when you're upgrading these Power Wheels toys, and you can go crazy with lights, sounds, and all that. It just depends on how much life you want to get out of these cars. For us, this car is 7 years old, almost 8. We've enjoyed it quite a bit. We're going to get some more fun out of it, and we'll see how fast we can make it before we destroy it. Thank you again for joining us as we transform our kingdom.